Now at 6, determined to make a difference.
I cannot go to sleep at night knowing that there are children that are enduring the same abuse that I and so many others went through, and neither should you.
Paris Hilton using her platform to change the way troubled teen centers operate in Utah. Tonight, an exclusive panel discussion on the new law and how you too can raise your voice.
Live from Utah's first TV station, ABC4 News at 6 starts now.
Good evening, I'm Glen Mills. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for this special report. Let's get right to our first guests, Paris Hilton and Caroline Lawson, both spending time at a youth facility here in Utah when they were teenagers. Great to have both of you on the show. This really was a big talking point during the session, and it's great to get into this and really dig into it. We appreciate your time. Let's begin with your own experience. As I mentioned, both of you spent time at a facility here in Utah. Paris, let's start with you. Walk us through what you experienced on a day-to-day basis.
When I was 16, I was kidnapped in the middle of the night by an escort company, and I was brought to Utah to Provo Canyon School. While I was there, I experienced verbal, psychological, and physical abuse on a daily basis. I experienced and saw things that no child should ever have to go through or see, and it was traumatizing. And till this day, I still have severe nightmares and post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's why I wanted to speak out and tell my story so this can't happen to any other child.
Okay, we will get more into that in a minute. Caroline, let's bring you in real quick. Tell us about your experience at a facility.
So I was sent to a behavior modification school when I was 14. And at the time I was, like most teenagers, trying to figure myself out, and I wanted to listen to the music I wanted to listen to and dress the way I wanted to dress. And my mom and I just couldn't see eye to eye on some of those things. So after I arrived at this facility, it became apparent very quickly that this was not a normal boarding school. I wasn't allowed to talk. I wasn't allowed to make eye contact with any of my peers. I wasn't allowed to move freely, even to stand up or sit down on my own. And I lived most of this time in complete silence for about 2.5 years. So it was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life, not to mention the physical abuse and threats of violence that were pervasive throughout my stay there.
Both of you mentioned the period of silence. Paris, we led off with you testifying up on Utah's Capitol Hill saying you can't sleep at night knowing what's going on, and you told the lawmakers they shouldn't either. So what was it like living with that for so long before speaking out?
When I got out of that place, I made a promise to myself that I was never going to talk about it or think about it again because it was just too painful. And then when I started doing my documentary, This is Paris, the director was asking me why I was having these nightmares, and I opened up to her. And that's when I started doing research and seeing that everything that was happening to me 20 years ago is still happening today. And that's why I knew that I needed to use my platform and my voice to make change. And I'm just incredibly proud of what's happened now because of that.
Caroline, let's bring you back in. Talk about what it was like for you those 2 years being silent, and why did you decide to come out and share your story?
So when you're under that amount of pressure and stress and fear for that amount of time, your brain and your body has an interesting way of responding to that level of stress and that constant stress. So this is where most of us end up with diagnoses like post-traumatic stress disorder. I personally also have chronic PTSD from my experiences there. One of the only ways to get through something like this is to dissociate and to somehow separate yourself from the trauma. Because of my experiences after the program and how difficult I found it to live a normal life, I knew that not only what happened to me was wrong, but that no other child should have to piece their life together after going somewhere that's supposed to help them.
Paris, let's dig a little bit more into that, your documentary that you mentioned. Millions of views, millions of people have watched it. Thousands have come out and been able to tell their story because of that. How does it feel to, one, release that? I would imagine that was like releasing a burden off of your own shoulders, but then to see other people say, you know what, I can share my story too.
It's been the most empowering time of my life. You know, when I first told my story, I had no idea how the world was going to react. And then when my film came out, I just started receiving thousands of letters from other survivors who had been through the same thing, just thanking me and saying, because of you, I'm finally being believed and I have a voice now. And just to really validate people for their experiences and what they went through. And you know, then meeting with Breaking Code Silence, and just this whole community is so brave and resilient and courageous, and I am just proud to be a survivor. And this was something that I was so ashamed of before, but we're not the ones who should be ashamed. It's the people who work at and run these places are the ones who should be very ashamed of themselves.
Let's get more into Breaking Code Silence. That is a network. Caroline, talk about that. How does it work, and what positive movements are you seeing come from that?
So Breaking Code Silence really started as an online support community. For many decades, survivors of these programs have been not only speaking out about their experiences, but also trying to find a place where we could discuss what happened to us. So naturally, over time, this evolved from being a more of a support group and a community to really being an activist community and wanting to see change. Many of us are parents now. I have 2 kids, and so I can't imagine my children going through any of the things that I went through, and also knowing that there's kids still in these facilities. We had to do something.
Paris, talk a little bit more about the people that you have seen come out and tell their stories. You have a platform that most others do not. However, I would imagine you draw strength from seeing those numbers come out and telling their stories as well. Talk about that.
It's been incredible, just the outreach from the survivor community, as well as a lot of my friends who have experienced the same thing, who are also in the public eye. And when I spoke to them, they said, when I saw your documentary, you know, it brought a flood back of memories, and I didn't want to be silent about it either. And I'm so proud of my friends and people who have went through the same thing, who are now coming out and telling their story, because it's so empowering and powerful for all of us just to tell our truth, and it is true. The truth shall set you free.
And your story also leading to government action here in Utah,
Yes.
and other states are also looking at this. We're going to get more into that in a minute, but talk about how that all evolved. How did it get to the point where your experiences led to government action?
Well, in September, when my documentary came out, I was contacted by Senator Sarah Gelser, and I've been an advocate for her ever since. I think she is incredible, what she's doing for children. And then we came out here to do a rally in front of Provo Canyon School, and that got attention of Senator McKell. And then he started working with Caroline and the Breaking Code Silence team and us to start drafting this bill. And then we were just here a few months ago, and I spoke at the Senate and testified. And now here today, we just signed SB 127.
Yeah, ceremonial signing up at the Capitol. Your thoughts, Caroline, on getting to this point and seeing this effort, knowing where it started years and years ago for you, and now coming to this point where legislative action is actually now enacted in the state of Utah?
It really feels like a dream. This has been many years of wishing and hoping that we could do something and that people would listen. And I think now in our culture, we're in a space where we are listening to survivors when they say, this happened to me and this is wrong. Not that we haven't been having this conversation for many years, but we're finally now in a place where the world is ready to hear it and we're ready to do something different.
I can't help but have this keep coming back in my mind as I talk to the two of you. The whole point of going to a facility like this is to put you on a positive path. Mm-hmm. Both of you, it clearly put you on a negative path. Mm-hmm. It seemed to be counterproductive. Is that how you would describe it?
100%. A place where you're supposed to go to heal shouldn't be somewhere where you get even more trauma than what you came in for. It just blows my mind that these places actually exist.
Caroline, your thoughts. Was there anything positive come from this at all?
I think the positive things that I did receive from it were not what was intended. What I learned about myself is that I'm incredibly strong to go through that kind of experience and come out on the other side. And I think especially when we're dealing with children who have already survived trauma, we don't need to test their strength anymore. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to provide them evidence-based treatment. We need to be able to provide them support, resources, community-based services, and things that are actually scientifically proven to help. These methods are not scientifically proven, and ultimately what we're seeing is the negative result of that carelessness.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but stay with us because still ahead, the new state law that places more oversight on these facilities here in Utah. We're going to break it down when we return.
You're watching ABC4 News.
Welcome back. We turn our attention now to the legislative process and welcome State Senator Mike McKell and Oregon State Senator Sarah Gelser to the conversation. Glad to have both of you with us. Let's get right into this. Senator McKell, how did you end up the sponsor of this bill that passed in the state of Utah?
I had a family member who was actually an employee in a facility years ago. He was hurt in a really traumatic way. He was attacked, suffered a traumatic brain injury, still suffers from it. So I started to pay attention to the issue, talked to several of my colleagues in the law that had dealt with some of these injuries. And in the back of my mind, I was always going to look at this issue and fix the issue. And it was actually this fall when Paris Hilton came to Utah, brought a lot of attention to the issue.
Okay, I want to get into what this law does specifically in a minute, but first, Senator Gelser, this is something that's been on your radar for a while.
Yes, I chair the Human Services Committee in Oregon, and several years ago I started speaking with kids living in congregate care. The stories they told were overwhelming and heartbreaking, and it is just critical that we make the changes in law to keep these kids safe. They deserve so much better than what they're getting right now.
Okay, Paris, you got in contact with these two, not necessarily knowing it was going to happen. What did you think when a Republican senator from Spanish Fork got in touch with you and said, hey, we need to work on this here. Can we work together?
I was just thrilled and so surprised and so excited and knew that this would be the next steps into making change.
Senator McKell, let's get into that change. What does this new law specifically do as far as regulation for these facilities in our state?
Glenn, that's a great question. There's a lot of things it does. Let's start with the most important. We actually allocate some funding, some critical funding that we've needed for a long time. We should be able to hire 6 to 8 new investigators. I think that's important. But we have really strong reporting. We have restrictions. We've had kids that have been chemically restrained. That is banned. We've had kids that have been secluded and isolated in a way they shouldn't have. More than anything else, I liked your last segment. Caroline talked about adopting and using best practices based on medical literature, based on practices in the industry. And more than anything else, what we've done is we've done reform to adopt best practices based on science and based on actual treatment.
And Paris, are you satisfied with that end result? Is this what you wanted to see? Is it a step? Does more need to come?
I'm so thrilled, but this is the first step. Utah is the first step. This is the place where I was abused at, and this is happening not only in Utah, it's happening in many other states. So next is taking this to a federal level, so in all 50 states this can't happen again.
Senator Gelser, what are you working on specifically in your state?
In our state, we have made sure that we're not sending kids to other states anymore, and we are working to regulate the transport industry. The people that came into Paris's house and took her from her bed in the night, that should not be permitted anyplace, and they are not regulated, but in Oregon they will be.
I saw a special report over the weekend that you were featured in. You actually had an incident from your state where a child ended up dying.
Correct. Actually, the child was a Michigan child, but we had 2 children there who were watching. Many states send kids out of state, and we had a bunch of kids here in Utah.
Okay. From both you senators, I want to get into this perspective. How important, when we're talking about the legislative process, when we carry it from introduction to today's ceremonial signing of the bill, how important are victims' voices in this process? We saw Paris come up, we saw others come up and testify before the Senate and lawmakers. How important is it to do that?
For those that followed the committee and watched, we had a local gentleman, Jeff Netto, who testified. He was in a facility as a youth, and a really, really traumatic experience. After that, I received dozens of emails from folks that had problems, and I started looking through some of our incident reports. I think all of that is incredibly helpful.
And how crucial is that when convincing your colleagues to pass this bill, because it had a lot of support this legislative session?
I think it brought a lot of context to what was really happening. I don't think, and I certainly didn't understand the the full scope of what was happening in the industry. I don't think my colleagues did. It's not because we don't care. It's because oftentimes we just don't know. We don't know everything that's happening in our state. And I think a lot of my colleagues were really surprised to learn that a lot of these problems still happen. One of the things that always frustrates me, Glenn, is we talk about this issue as if it happened in the past. We've had serious violations in 2021. We've had serious violations in 2020, 2019, 2018. And this is an issue that's pressing and it's current. And I think a lot of my colleagues just didn't realize that.
Senator Gelser, real quick, then we'll finish up with you, Paris. How important is it to hear from victims' experiences when pushing legislation like this?
The survivors are the experts. The survivors have been telling us what's wrong for a long time. They've been telling us what's needed. They are the only ones that can fix the problem. As legislators, we just hold up the megaphone, but we need to do what these kids have been telling us all along. It's that simple.
Paris, I imagine it's not easy to come out and tell your story. You go before this panel of lawmakers, people you don't necessarily know, all the cameras on. What was that experience like, and talk about how it was rewarding in the end?
This was the first time I've ever done anything like this, so I was very nervous. But after I told my story, it just was so healing, and just to see the response from all the senators, where some of them even had tears in their eyes, and they had no idea. And I could understand that, because when you hear these stories and think about it, it's hard to believe that this is actually real. It seems like something out of some scary horror film. So just to use my voice and my platform has been so powerful. And it just shows the power of telling the truth.
I do remember some of the senators on that panel coming and expressing their gratitude to you for being there, and they put that out on social media. Senator McHale, one quick question for you before we wrap up. What kind of resistance did you get from the industry as you presented this bill?
I think the industry realized that there needed to be reform, there needed to be change, and we needed to adopt and reform and improve our practices. The industry was very supportive during the process, and I think that's kind of lost on some folks. The industry was supportive in adopting best practices, and I appreciate that. It certainly made the process much easier.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction I wanted to make sure that we made in this report, because they were on board, and that's in part why you're able to see such success as the bill moved from the Senate to the House and then to the governor's office. All right, stay with us. Coming up, your voice. It is a powerful thing, no matter how big your platform is. More on why it's critical to speak up after the break. Welcome back. Local media has shined the light on issues in these troubled teen facilities as more and more people are speaking out. For more on that, we add Jessica Miller with the Salt Lake Tribune to the discussion. Glad to have you with us. Let's start with you in this segment, Jessica. You were first made aware of these facilities when an event in southern Utah took place. Talk about how you became aware of that.
So a couple years ago, there was a riot at one of these facilities in southern Utah, and that's kind of how this industry got on my radar. I was thinking a lot about these kids and how they had to literally be rioting for us to pay attention to what was happening in those facilities. So after we wrote that story, we kind of expanded our look and looked at this industry as a whole and how it operates in Utah, and where some of those gaps have been with reform and with the regulations here in our state.
Paris, you were tracking this. How did it feel to you when you started seeing these media reports bring these issues to light? I would imagine it was refreshing to see, yeah, that's what I've been talking about all this time.
I was so happy to see everyone raising awareness for it. It was all over the media, and especially I want to thank Jessica so much with the Salt Lake Tribune and for using her platform, because just the reporting that she did was just so deep, and she really told the story, and that has just spread around like wildfire all over the internet and social media and the world. So thank you, Jessica, for using your voice.
And Jessica, you have also implemented an accountability factor in this. Talk about the database that you are using and operating.
Yeah, one of the things we saw right away was that it was really, really hard to get records that showed simple things like inspections or when stuff was going wrong at these places. And so when we asked the state for those records, they wanted thousands of dollars. So we did a crowdfunding campaign. Paris was one of our donors, and we raised that money with 100 people who wanted these records. And so now Those are available at sltrib.com/teen treatment. Anyone can go and search inspection reports, incident reports of these places, so people like parents or anybody who wants to get a better idea of what's actually happening at these facilities, they can do that now.
And when you talk about incident reports, what might that reveal about a certain center?
So anytime a critical incident happens, which is when a kid is hurt in a facility, the facilities have to report that to the state. If it's found that facilities have violated a rule, if they did something wrong, then those are the type of incidents that you'll see now in the Tribune's database.
Senator McKell, that database, you even admit that's a huge key in this reform, and it's being done by local journalists. You would like to see this at a state level?
I'd absolutely like to see it at a state level. I'd commend the Tribune and Jessica Miller. I think putting that database together has been extremely powerful in getting that message out. As we looked at the bill, we wanted comprehensive reform. I hadn't thought of a database. It's something, you know, quite frankly, the fact that the Tribune needs to do it instead of the legislature, that's problematic. We should be doing that, but I'm glad it's there. I think it's a really good tool, and I think Jessica has done a terrific job in bringing that database, and great, I mean, just incredible transparency to the industry. All
right, that's not always your tune when it comes to the media. So obviously there's been an important partnership in this issue. Talk about that.
Well, there's always a little tension between the legislature and the press, but I'll tell you on this issue, the important thing is you saw the relationship with the Tribune, the relationship with a Democratic senator from another state. When we look at abuse with kids, that's an issue that impacts all of us, and I think it's all hands on deck, and I think the Tribune has done a fantastic job and continues to do that. I mean, the media in general, just since the session ended, we've seen, you know, criminal charges in 2 different sex abuse cases in Utah, and I can't track that as a legislator every day, and I appreciate the role the media plays.
Jessica, talk about the personal side of the story. That's obviously what connects readers and viewers with that. How important is it for people like Paris to come forward in the role of the story that you put together?
I think that, you know, having the voices of the people who have actually experienced this is so important, and to hear their experiences and to listen to them and to believe them. A lot of times a common thing I hear from survivors is that they haven't been believed up to this point. So I think that us being able to amplify those stories so people can see them and understand them is really important.
All right, we have about 30 seconds left, Paris. The last word is for you. What is your advice for those in the community who want to get involved in policy reform?
Well, just like I proved, you could not be a senator or a legislator and be one of the people and actually pen a bill into law. So it's just about standing up for what's right and using your voice, your platform, starting a movement, and just supporting it. And I think that anything is possible when you put your all into it.
And did you ever imagine sitting here in this studio talking about a bill that you helped pen being signed into law?
No, I never thought I would ever want to come back to Utah again, but now I love it here.
Well, and we're happy to have you here. Thank you all for being part of this very important conversation tonight. We really appreciate it. You can find all these segments and more online, abc4.com, and we hope to see you again tonight at 10. Good night.